Imagine a volcano and a still lake, side by side. When provoked, the volcano erupts violently, spewing destruction in all directions. But when the lake is disturbed, it simply embraces the disturbance, allowing ripples to form and then gradually return to stillness. These two bodies of nature represent the two ways we can respond to life's provocations, with reactive eruption or with mindful absorption. The Buddha once said, "You will not be punished for your anger. You will be punished by your anger." This profound insight reveals that our reactions don't protect us from harm. They are the very source of our suffering. When we react impulsively to life's challenges, we surrender our peace, our clarity, and ultimately, our freedom. In the ancient text of the DhammaMirror, we find these words, "Though one may conquer 1,000 times 1,000 men in battle, yet he who conquers himself is the greatest warrior." This conquest of self begins with mastering the art of non-reaction, the ability to experience emotions without being controlled by them. The Stoic philosopher Marcus Aurelius echoed this wisdom when he wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." Both Eastern and Western wisdom traditions recognize that true power lies not in controlling the world around us, but in mastering our response to it. Consider how often your peace has been stolen by a careless comment, a critical email, or even a disapproving glance. In those moments, did your immediate reaction serve you well, or did it simply deepen your distress? Did your defensive words bring clarity, or did they cloud the waters of understanding? The reactive mind is like a puppet with strings pulled by every external stimulus. Someone criticizes your work, and you feel compelled to defend yourself. A driver cuts you off in traffic, and anger rises automatically. Your partner forgets an important date, and hurt feelings trigger accusatory words. In each case, you're not choosing your response. You're being chosen by patterns of reactivity so deeply ingrained they feel like your very identity. But what if there was another way? What if, between stimulus and response, you could find a sacred pause, a moment of clarity where freedom resides? What if you could feel emotions fully without being controlled by them? This is not about suppressing your feelings or becoming emotionless. Quite the opposite. It's about developing such intimacy with your emotional landscape that you can navigate it with wisdom rather than being swept away by its currents. The art of non-reaction is perhaps the most powerful skill you can develop in our overstimulated, hyperreactive world. It's the foundation of emotional intelligence, the cornerstone of meaningful relationships, and the gateway to inner peace. In this exploration of the noble art of non-reaction, we'll journey through ancient Buddhist wisdom and modern neuroscience. We'll meet people who have transformed their lives by mastering this art, and we'll discover practical techniques that you can apply immediately to cultivate greater emotional freedom. The path begins not with changing others, but with understanding yourself. It starts not with controlling the world, but with mastering your inner landscape. And it leads not to indifference, but to a more profound engagement with life, one characterized by clarity, compassion, and choice rather than reactivity, regret, and resentment. Are you ready to discover the transformative power of non-reaction? Let's begin. Sarah Jenkins sat in her corner office at a Seattle tech company, staring at her computer screen as tears of frustration welled in her eyes. As a 35-year-old middle manager with ambitions of reaching the C-suite, she had always prided herself on her drive and work ethic. But there was one problem that kept sabotaging her progress: her reactivity. Earlier that day, in a meeting with the executive team, the CEO had questioned the delays in her department's project. Before she could think, Sarah had launched into a defensive explanation, her voice rising as she deflected blame onto the engineering team. She could see the subtle shift in the room, the CEO's slight frown, her colleagues' uncomfortable glances, the engineering lead's hardened expression. This wasn't the first time her reactive tendencies had damaged her professional relationships. Friends had gently suggested she might be too emotional for leadership. A performance review had mentioned her defensive communication style. And just last month, she'd sent a heated email to a colleague at 2 a.m., only to regret it deeply the next morning. There has to be a better way, Sarah whispered to herself, closing her laptop. That weekend, a friend invited her to a 10-day Vipassana meditation retreat. Initially skeptical, Sarah agreed only because she felt desperate for change. Little did she know that this retreat would transform not just her career, but her entire relationship with her emotions. Under the guidance of Michael, a former business executive turned meditation teacher, Sarah began to understand the mechanics of her reactivity. On the third day of sitting in silence, observing her breath and bodily sensations, she had a breakthrough. She noticed a distinct pattern. A triggering comment would lead to a hot sensation in her chest, tension in her shoulders, and then defensive words would follow almost automatically. You're not actually choosing your responses, Michael explained during a one-on-one session. You're being chosen by patterns so deeply ingrained they feel like your identity. But they're not who you are, they're just habits of mind. Sarah's story illustrates a challenge many of us face. In a world that rewards quick responses and values certainty over reflection, we've lost touch with the power of the pause, that sacred space between stimulus and response where our freedom truly lies. The Buddha taught that this space is the birthplace of wisdom. In the Anguttara Nikaya, he explains, "Do not believe something simply because you have heard it. Do not believe something simply because it is spoken and rumored by many. Do not believe something simply because it is found written in your religious books. Do not believe in something merely on the authority of your teachers and elders. But after observation and analysis, when you find that anything agrees with reason and is conducive to the good and benefit of one and all, then accept it and live up to it." This teaching invites us to move from automatic reaction to mindful response, to create space between what happens to us and how we choose to engage with it. Today, we'll explore the Buddhist concept of equanimity or Upekkha, discover what modern neuroscience reveals about our reactive patterns, learn practical techniques for cultivating non-reactivity, and hear how real people have transformed their lives through this powerful practice. Let's begin with one of Buddhism's most profound yet least understood concepts, Upekkha or equanimity. The Buddhist concept of equanimity, Upekkha. In the heart of Buddhist psychology lies a concept that perfectly captures the essence of non-reaction. Upekkha, commonly translated as equanimity. But this translation barely scratches the surface of its profound meaning. Upekkha is one of the 4 Brahmaviharas or divine abodes in Buddhist practice, alongside loving-kindness, metta, compassion, karuna, and sympathetic joy mudita. While the other 3 qualities direct positive emotions toward others, Upekkha represents a balanced state of mind that remains steady regardless of circumstances. The Pali word Upekkha derives from upa, neutrally, and iksh, to look at. It suggests seeing with patience and understanding, maintaining mental stability in the face of life's inevitable ups and downs. This is not indifference or apathy, quite the opposite. True equanimity comes from engaging fully with experience while remaining unshaken by it. In the Dhammapada, the Buddha describes the person of equanimity as one who is not moved by the 8 worldly winds, gain and loss, fame and disrepute, praise and blame, pleasure and pain. These pairs represent the constant fluctuations of life that typically trigger our reactive patterns. The person who has cultivated Upekkha experiences these changes without being tossed about by them. Consider how differently we might live if praise didn't inflate our ego and criticism didn't deflate our self-worth. Imagine maintaining inner stability whether receiving a promotion or facing a rejection. This is the promise of Upekkha, not that we won't feel joy or disappointment, but that these feelings won't control our actions or define our sense of self. The Buddha illustrated this quality through the metaphor of a mountain. Just as a solid rock is not shaken by the storm, even so the wise are not affected by praise or blame. This image captures the steadfast nature of equanimity, deeply rooted, immovable, yet fully present in the midst of life's storms. But how does one develop this quality? The Buddha taught that Upekkha arises from understanding three essential truths. First, the truth of impermanence, Anicca, recognizing that all phenomena, including our emotions and reactions, are transient. When we truly understand that no feeling, no matter how intense, will last forever, we can observe even difficult emotions with greater equanimity. Second, the truth of suffering or unsatisfactoriness, Dukkha, acknowledging that reactivity itself creates suffering. When we react impulsively to protect ourselves from discomfort, we paradoxically generate more suffering. Third, the truth of non-self, Anatta, realizing that there is no fixed, unchanging self to defend. Much of our reactivity stems from protecting our self-image or ego. When we see through the illusion of a separate, permanent self, many of our reactive patterns naturally dissolve. In the Satipatthana Sutta, the Buddha offers practical guidance for cultivating equanimity through mindfulness. When experiencing a pleasant feeling, the meditator knows, I experience a pleasant feeling. When experiencing a painful feeling, he knows, I experience a painful feeling. This simple practice of noting feelings without immediately reacting to them creates the space for equanimity to develop. The 5th century Buddhist scholar Buddhaghosa described the near enemy of equanimity as indifference or apathy. This distinction is crucial. Equanimity is not about not caring. It's about caring deeply while remaining balanced. It's not emotional suppression, but emotional wisdom. In modern contexts, we might practice Upekkha when a colleague criticizes our work, and instead of becoming defensive, we listen with openness. We face a significant loss, and while feeling grief fully, we don't allow it to consume us. We receive praise, enjoying it without becoming attached to or defined by it. We encounter someone whose views oppose our own, and we remain curious rather than combative. The cultivation of Upekkha doesn't happen overnight. It's a gradual process of training the mind to recognize reactive patterns and create space around them. With consistent practice, we develop what the Buddha called unshakable freedom of mind, the ability to remain centered and clear regardless of external circumstances. As we'll see next, modern neuroscience offers fascinating insights into why this ancient practice is so powerful, revealing how non-reactivity literally rewires our brains for greater emotional intelligence and well-being. The neuroscience of non-reaction. What happens in your brain when someone criticizes you? Thanks to advances in neuroscience, we now have a clearer understanding of the biological basis of reactivity and why the Buddhist practice of non-reaction is so transformative. When we encounter a threatening stimulus, whether physical danger or social threat like criticism, our amygdala, an almond-shaped structure deep in the brain, activates within milliseconds. This triggers the fight-flight-freeze response, flooding our system with stress hormones like cortisol and adrenaline. Blood flow increases to our limbs and decreases to our prefrontal cortex, the region responsible for rational thinking, nuanced decision-making, and impulse control. In evolutionary terms, this reaction makes perfect sense. When facing a predator, you don't want to deliberate, you want to react instantly. The problem is that our brains process social threats much like physical ones. A critical email can trigger the same neurological cascade as a charging lion, impairing our ability to respond thoughtfully precisely when we most need that capacity. Dr. Richard Davidson, founder of the Center for Healthy Minds at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, has conducted groundbreaking research on the neuroscience of meditation. His studies of long-term meditation practitioners reveal something remarkable. Their brains process emotional stimuli differently. Using functional MRI scans, Davidson found that experienced meditators showed decreased activity in the amygdala and increased activity in the prefrontal cortex when exposed to emotional triggers. In other words, their brains don't react as strongly to potential threats, and they maintain access to their higher cognitive functions even when provoked. Even more encouraging, Davidson's research shows that these changes begin to appear after just 8 weeks of regular meditation practice. A 2018 study published in Scientific Reports demonstrated increased gray matter density in brain regions associated with attention and emotional regulation following an 8-week mindfulness program. What's happening here? Through practices like mindfulness meditation, we're essentially rewiring the neural pathways that connect our emotional and rational brain centers. We're strengthening what neuroscientists call the executive control network, the brain systems that allow us to observe emotions without being hijacked by them. This aligns perfectly with the Buddhist concept of Upekkha we just explored. When we practice non-reaction, we're not just adopting a philosophical stance. We're literally changing our brain's architecture to support greater emotional regulation and resilience. The neuroscience of non-reaction also highlights the importance of the pause. When we create even a brief moment between stimulus and response, we allow our prefrontal cortex to come back online. This is why simple practices like taking 3 deep breaths when triggered can be so effective. They give our brain time to shift from reactive mode to responsive mode. Dr. Dan Siegel, clinical professor of psychiatry at UCLA, calls this name it to tame it. When we label our emotions, I'm feeling angry, or this is anxiety, we activate the prefrontal cortex and reduce amygdala activity. This simple act of naming creates distance between us and the emotion, preventing complete identification with it. This mirrors the Buddhist practice of mindful noting, where meditators silently label experiences as they arise, thinking, hearing, feeling anger. Both ancient wisdom and modern science confirm that this simple act of awareness creates space around our experiences, allowing us to respond rather than react. Perhaps most fascinating is research on the default mode network, DMN, a set of brain regions active when we're not focused on the external world. An overactive DMN is associated with rumination, worry, and self-referential thinking, the mental patterns that fuel reactivity. Both meditation and cognitive behavioral therapy have been shown to reduce DMN activity, helping us step out of the narrative loops that drive reactive behavior. As we integrate these neuroscientific insights with Buddhist wisdom, we arrive at a powerful conclusion. Non-reaction is not just a spiritual ideal, but a trainable skill with measurable effects on brain function. By understanding the neural basis of reactivity, we can approach our practice with greater confidence, knowing that each moment of mindful non-reaction is literally reshaping our brains for greater emotional freedom. Now, let's explore a practical framework for cultivating this skill in daily life, the RAIN practice. The 4-step RAIN practice for emotional mastery. When Sarah returned to work after her meditation retreat, she faced an immediate test of her newfound awareness. During a company-wide meeting, a colleague publicly blamed her for a major project failure. She felt the familiar heat rising in her chest, her shoulders tensing, her mind racing to defend herself. But this time, something different happened. Instead of launching into a defensive response, Sarah remembered what Michael had taught her about the RAIN practice, a powerful 4-step process for working with difficult emotions. In that crucial moment, she applied this technique, transforming what could have been a career-damaging reaction into a response that earned her respect and resolved the conflict constructively. RAIN is an acronym developed by meditation teacher Tara Brach that synthesizes ancient Buddhist practices with modern psychological insights. It stands for recognize, allow, investigate, and non-identification. Let's explore each step and how you can apply this transformative practice in your daily life. The first step is to recognize what's happening in your mind and body. This means simply noting the emotion that's arising. I'm feeling angry. This is anxiety. Or, I notice irritation. Recognition interrupts the automatic pilot of reactivity and brings mindful awareness to your experience. It's like turning on a light in a dark room. Suddenly you can see what's actually happening rather than stumbling around blindly. For Sarah, this meant silently noting, anger is arising, and there's embarrassment here too. This simple act of recognition already created a small space between her and the emotions, preventing total identification with them. The second step is to allow the experience to be there, just as it is, without trying to fix, change, or get rid of it. This doesn't mean you like or agree with what's happening. It simply means you're acknowledging reality rather than fighting against it. Allowing is an act of self-compassion that interrupts our habitual tendency to judge or suppress our emotions. Sarah took a deep breath and silently said to herself, "It's okay to feel this way. I can allow these feelings to be here." She didn't try to push away her anger or shame, but gave them permission to exist. The third step is to investigate with kindness. This means bringing a gentle, curious attention to your experience, particularly to how the emotion manifests in your body. Where do you feel it? What sensations are present? Is it hot or cold, tight or expansive, moving or still? This step helps you relate to emotions as bodily experiences rather than getting caught in the narrative about what's happening. Sarah noticed the heat in her face, the tightness in her throat, the rapid beating of her heart. She observed these sensations with curiosity rather than judgment, recognizing them as temporary physical experiences rather than who she was. The final step is non-identification, realizing that while these emotions are happening, they don't define you. As the Buddha taught, emotions are like weather patterns passing through the sky of awareness. You can experience them fully without becoming them. This step is about recognizing this is not me, or this belongs to the universal human experience, not just my personal story. For Sarah, this meant recognizing this anger isn't who I am. It's just passing through right now. With this perspective, she was able to respond to her colleague by saying, "I understand your frustration. Let's look at what happened and find a solution together." Words that came from clarity rather than reactivity. The RAIN practice can be done in a formal meditation setting, where you might spend several minutes on each step. But its real power lies in applying it in the heat of the moment, as Sarah did. Even a 30-second RAIN practice can create enough space to shift from reaction to response. This practice embodies the Buddhist principle of mindfulness, sati, combined with clear comprehension, sampajana. It's not about analyzing or intellectualizing your emotions, but about bringing present moment awareness to your experience in a way that fosters wisdom and compassion. Regular practice of RAIN gradually rewires your neural pathways, making non-reaction more accessible even in challenging situations. As Tara Brach notes, the more you practice RAIN, the more you'll discover a spacious, compassionate awareness that exists independent of changing emotions. In our next segment, we'll explore how the ancient wisdom of Stoic philosophy complements Buddhist teachings on non-attachment, offering additional perspectives on mastering the art of non-reaction. Stoic philosophy and Buddhist non-attachment. Between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space lies our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and freedom. These words from psychiatrist and Holocaust survivor Viktor Frankl capture the essence of non-reaction. Though Frankl wasn't explicitly drawing from Buddhist or Stoic traditions, his insight perfectly bridges these two ancient philosophies that, despite developing independently on opposite sides of the world, arrived at remarkably similar conclusions about emotional mastery. Stoicism, which flourished in ancient Greece and Rome from the 3rd century BCE, offers powerful complementary wisdom to Buddhist teachings on non-reaction. While Buddhism emerged from the spiritual traditions of ancient India, Stoicism developed in the context of Greek and Roman civic life. Yet, both philosophies recognize that emotional reactivity is the primary source of human suffering, and both offered practical methods for cultivating inner freedom. The Stoic philosopher Epictetus, who began life as a slave before becoming one of Rome's most respected teachers, wrote, "Make the best use of what is in your power, and take the rest as it happens. Some things are up to us, and some things are not up to us." This distinction between what we can and cannot control is at the heart of Stoic practice. Similarly, the Buddha taught that suffering arises when we crave for things to be different than they are. Both traditions recognize that our reactions to events, not the events themselves, determine our well-being. Seneca, another prominent Stoic, wrote, "We suffer more often in imagination than in reality." This insight parallels the Buddhist understanding that much of our suffering comes from our mental projections rather than direct experience. Both traditions encourage us to stay with what is actually happening rather than getting lost in stories about what might happen or what should have happened. The Stoic practice of negative visualization, deliberately imagining losing what you value, resembles the Buddhist contemplation of impermanence, Anicca. Both practices help us hold our attachments more lightly, reducing the reactive patterns that arise when things inevitably change. Marcus Aurelius, the Roman emperor and Stoic philosopher, advised, "When you wake up in the morning, tell yourself, the people I deal with today will be meddling, ungrateful, arrogant, dishonest, jealous, and surly." This wasn't an exercise in cynicism, but in preparation. By anticipating challenges, we can respond to them with greater equanimity when they arise. This parallels the Buddhist practice of equanimity meditation, where we cultivate balanced awareness toward all beings. Where these traditions differ is in their metaphysical foundations. Buddhism's concept of non-self, anatta, suggests that there is no permanent, unchanging self to defend, a radical departure from Western philosophical traditions. Stoicism, while acknowledging the transience of life, maintains a stronger sense of individual identity and virtue. Yet both traditions offer practical wisdom for our daily lives. From Stoicism, we can adopt the practice of the dichotomy of control, clearly distinguishing between what we can and cannot influence. From Buddhism, we can practice mindful awareness of our emotional states without identification with them. When combined, these approaches offer a powerful framework for non-reaction. Recognize what is and isn't within your control, Stoic wisdom. Observe your emotional responses with mindful awareness, Buddhist practice. Remember the impermanent nature of all phenomena, shared by both traditions. Choose your response based on wisdom rather than reactivity, the goal of both philosophies. The integration of these traditions is not merely theoretical. Modern cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, one of the most evidence-based psychological treatments, draws heavily from both Stoic and Buddhist insights. The core CBT practice of identifying and questioning automatic thoughts has clear parallels in both traditions. By drawing from these complementary wisdom traditions, we can develop a more nuanced understanding of non-reaction. We learn that emotional mastery isn't about suppressing feelings, but about relating to them with wisdom. It's not about disconnecting from life, but about engaging with it more fully from a place of clarity and choice. As the Stoic philosopher Epictetus said, "It's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters." And as the Buddha taught, "You are the master of your mind, not its slave." Both traditions remind us that true freedom lies not in controlling external circumstances, but in mastering our internal responses. Now, let's explore another powerful story of transformation through the practice of non-reaction. Eleanor's journey from emotional reactivity to inner peace. Eleanor's transformation through mindful observation. Eleanor Matthews stood at the back of the church, watching her daughter walk down the aisle in a white gown. It should have been the happiest day of her life as a mother, but anxiety gnawed at her stomach. In just moments, she would come face to face with Robert, her ex-husband of 5 years, who had left their 15-year marriage for a younger woman. At 45, Eleanor had rebuilt her life as an elementary school teacher in Portland. She had friends, a fulfilling career, and 2 grown children who loved her. But whenever Robert's name came up, or when she saw photos of him with his new wife on social media, a familiar storm would brew inside her. Anger, betrayal, and a deep sense of inadequacy that would consume her for days. "I thought I was over it," she confided to her friend Lisa, a psychologist, after one particularly difficult encounter at their son's graduation. "But every time I see him, it's like it happened yesterday. I hate that he still has this power over me." Lisa introduced Eleanor to both Buddhist mindfulness practices and Stoic philosophy. These are 2 different traditions that arrived at similar insights about human suffering, she explained. Both recognize that our reactions to events, not the events themselves, determine our well-being. Eleanor began with a simple practice. Whenever thoughts of Robert arose, instead of following the familiar narrative of blame and self-pity, she would simply note, thinking, and return her attention to her breath or current activity. This basic mindfulness technique, drawn from Buddhist practice, helped her recognize how often her mind automatically traveled down well-worn paths of reactivity. She also began keeping a reaction journal, noting situations that triggered strong emotions and observing the patterns. She noticed that her reactions were strongest when she felt her self-worth was being questioned, suggesting that the issue wasn't really about Robert, but about her own sense of value. As the wedding day approached, Eleanor knew she needed something more structured to prepare for this significant challenge. Lisa taught her the rain practice we explored earlier, and Eleanor committed to practicing it daily in the weeks leading up to the event. On the morning of the wedding, Eleanor woke early and sat in meditation. She visualized seeing Robert, allowed herself to feel the anticipated emotions, and reminded herself, "These feelings are natural, but they don't define me. I can experience them without being controlled by them." When the moment finally came, and Robert approached her at the reception, Eleanor felt the familiar wave of emotions rising, the tightness in her chest, the flush of heat in her face, the impulse to either lash out or flee. But instead of being swept away by these sensations, she mentally noted, recognize, allow, investigate, non-identification. She observed her physical reactions with curiosity rather than judgment. She reminded herself that these feelings, while intense, were temporary visitors, not her identity. And in that space of awareness, she found the freedom to respond rather than react. "Eleanor, you look well," Robert said, awkwardly extending his hand. Instead of the sarcastic retort that might have come automatically before, Eleanor smiled genuinely. "Thank you, Robert. Isn't it beautiful to see our daughter so happy?" The conversation that followed wasn't perfect or without tension, but it was authentic and dignified. For the first time in 5 years, Eleanor walked away from an encounter with her ex-husband feeling empowered rather than depleted. Later, reflecting on the experience with Lisa, Eleanor said, "It wasn't that I didn't feel anything. I felt everything. But I wasn't controlled by those feelings. There was a space around them, and in that space, I found choice." Eleanor's story illustrates that non-reaction isn't about becoming emotionless or suppressing natural feelings. It's about changing our relationship to those feelings so they inform our responses rather than dictate them. Through consistent practice, what once seemed impossible, facing her deepest trigger with equanimity, became not only possible, but transformative. Now, let's explore specific daily practices you can implement to cultivate this skill of non-reaction in your own life. Daily practices for cultivating non-reaction. The art of non-reaction, like any skill, develops through consistent practice. Here are 4 powerful daily practices that can help you cultivate this transformative ability in your everyday life. First, the 5-5-5 meditation. This simple but effective practice takes just 15 minutes and can be done anywhere. Begin by setting a timer for 15 minutes, divided into 3 5-minute segments. During the first 5 minutes, focus solely on your breath, counting from 1 to 10 and then starting over. This builds concentration and presence. For the next 5 minutes, observe physical sensations throughout your body without judgment or analysis. Simply note what you feel: warmth, coolness, tension, relaxation, without trying to change anything. In the final 5 minutes, observe your thoughts and emotions as if they were clouds passing across the sky of your awareness. Don't follow them or push them away. Simply acknowledge their presence and let them be. This practice strengthens your ability to observe your internal experiences without immediately reacting to them, the foundation of non-reactivity. Even one session daily will gradually rewire your neural pathways toward greater emotional regulation. Second, keep a pause journal. Each evening, take 5 minutes to reflect on your day through the lens of reactivity and response. Record 3 situations where you reacted automatically, noting the trigger, your reaction, and the outcome. Then record 3 situations where you found the pause between stimulus and response, noting how this changed the outcome. This practice builds self-awareness and reinforces the value of non-reaction. Third, practice the just observing technique during daily activities. Several times throughout your day, especially during moments of stress or emotional intensity, pause and ask yourself, can I just observe this situation without immediately reacting? Take 3 deep breaths and watch the scenario unfold as if you were a neutral observer rather than a participant. Notice details you might otherwise miss when caught in reactive mode. This practice helps you develop the habit of creating space between events and your responses to them. Finally, implement the stop practice whenever you feel reactivity arising. Stop what you're doing. Take a breath. Observe what's happening in your body, emotions, and thoughts. Proceed with awareness. This 4-step process can be completed in as little as 30 seconds and serves as an emergency intervention when you feel yourself being pulled into reactivity. With practice, it becomes an automatic reset button that helps you return to centered awareness even in challenging situations. Remember that the goal isn't perfection. You won't suddenly become non-reactive in all situations. But with consistent practice, you'll find yourself creating more space between triggers and responses, making conscious choices more often, and experiencing greater freedom from habitual reactions. As the Buddha taught, drop by drop is the water pot filled. Each moment of mindful non-reaction builds your capacity for emotional mastery and inner peace. Welcome to the Noble Wisdom Path, where we uncover the sacred truths of your journey through Buddhist wisdom. Imagine yourself as a deep river. When stones of provocation are thrown into shallow waters, they create dramatic splashes and far-reaching ripples. But when those same stones enter deep waters, they sink with barely a disturbance on the surface. Through the practices we've explored, from the Buddhist concept of Upekkha to the rain technique, from Stoic wisdom to daily mindfulness practices, you can cultivate this depth within yourself. Not to become unfeeling, but to feel everything without being overwhelmed. Not to disconnect from life, but to engage with it more fully from a place of wisdom and choice. The art of non-reaction is perhaps the greatest gift you can give yourself in our reactive world. It's the foundation of emotional intelligence, the cornerstone of meaningful relationships, and the gateway to lasting inner peace. As you move forward, remember that this practice unfolds one moment at a time. Each pause between stimulus and response is a victory. Each mindful breath is an act of freedom. Each instance of choosing wisdom over reactivity reshapes your brain and transforms your life. Join the Noble Wisdom Path community. Subscribe, hit the bell, and share your reflections below on how non-reaction has impacted your life. Your journey toward emotional mastery and inner peace continues with each mindful moment. Thank you for walking this path with us today.